We had mentioned Rashi cites the Chazal, the Midrash, Avram holid es Yitzchok, that Avraham, only after he had the hay added to his name, was he able to father Yitzchok. That one interpretation. Or since Sari Menu was sequestered with Avimelech for one night, and then soon afterwards, they find out she's pregnant. What did people say? There were murmurings. People say Avram is married to her for years. She's not pregnant. She spends one night with Avimelech, and soon afterwards we find out she's pregnant. So evidently, who fathered Yitzchok? Avimelech must be the father of Yitzchok. So the Midrash says Hashem sent an angel, the angel whose was created to form the faces of newborns, that the face of the newborn that Sari Menu was carrying should be an exact replica of Yitzchak's face, of Avram's face. So they looked like identical twins. So there were no questions at any level that Avram holid es Yitzchak. Nobody could even consider saying that Avimelech was the father of that child. So the question is, what was the value of that? Why was it so important that should be? Could you imagine? Yitzchak is actually Avram's son. He's the patriarch. Yaakov is the son of Yitzchak. Yaakov is the father of the Jewish people. And yet people question, maybe the patriarch of the Jews was Avimelech. He's part of the pedigree. That Yitzchak is not the son of Avram, but he's the son of Avimelech. Could you imagine? Be disastrous. That's number one. Secondly, Yitzchak being known, irrefutably known, that he's the son of Avram, he was the heir apparent of his father, and he continued the mission of his father to espouse monotheism in the world. He had that but if people would think, would even question, he may be the son of this heathen, Avimelech, as they say, he's dead in the water. Because Avimelech was seen as an ogre, as a person who had corrupted values and corrupted character. Therefore, it was essential for Yitzchak to be the effective person on many levels. Firstly, that he's the patriarch of the Jewish people because he's the son of Avram. Secondly, in terms of his effectiveness in his lifetime, that he carries on the mission of his father, that he rides also on the coattails of Avram. That's the way I understood it. But the Midrash continues. In Navi, the prophets, Torah speaks about David being a fugitive. David was the son-in-law of Shaul, King Saul. And King Saul suspected that David was out to undermine his kingship, his kingdom, and he wants to become the king. And literally, he pursued him, he hunted him down. And David and his band of men were in hiding, and they reached a point they were starving to death. So the Navi tells us a story. He sent a message. There was a person by the name of Novel, who was the husband of Abigail. Abigail means Abigail. Abigail ultimately became the wife of David, was one of the wives of David. And he sends him a message through an agent that he needs bread and wine because they're starving to death. Novel sends back, it's not my problem, it's your problem, I'm giving you nothing. David at that time already was anointed by Shmuel Hanavi to be the king. He was already anointed in the lifetime of Shaul to be the king. A person who makes that kind of comment to a king, that's called rebellion. You have a right to put him to death. David immediately summoned his group with him. They were going to take out Novel. But with this kind of response, Abigail, the wife of Novel, gets wind of this. She immediately loads up pack animals with food, bread, wine, pressed figs. She's going to David. She comes to David and she gives him. And this is the first time David meets Abigail. She's a very special woman. Besides her beauty, is one of a kind. 10 days later, Hashem takes out Novel. There's a plague, Novel was taken because he was an evil man. Hashem took him out. So David says to Abigail, he wants to marry her. She wants to marry him. But there's a law, Jewish law, that before you marry a woman, if she was married before, whether she was divorced or widowed, you have to wait 3 months between the two marriages. Why? Because there's a possibility she's has conceived from the previous husband, and now she gives birth. If he marries her within 3 months, it's questionable whose son is he. The child is the child of the first husband, or is it the child of the second husband? So the law is you have to wait 3 months before the second husband marries the woman, because if she's expecting, the pregnancy will be noticeable, and if not, it's clear she's not expecting. David waited 3 months. He marries Abigail, and then she becomes pregnant. What do you think happens? The murmurings that the wife of David, Abigail, is carrying the child of Novel. It's a very important point here. The murmurings. So what does Hashem do? God sends the angel who was created to develop the faces of children, that the face of this child should be identical to the face of David HaMelech. This child who was born to Abigail looked exact like David. So therefore, this quelled any questions. All the murmurings were quelled. Clearly, this child is the son of David. So I asked the question, if it would be question, who's the king? We're talking about David is beginning of the Davidic line. So who is the king after David? Shlomo HaMelech. It was not this child. So what difference does it make? Murmurings, no murmurings. Fact is, David knows it's his child. People say a lot of things. Why did that have to be put at bay? That it's unquestioned that this child is David's child, and Hashem had to perform a miracle, sending the angel to develop the face of this newborn child to look exact like his father, to be identical. Avram, we understand, because it was important. Yitzchak should be known as the irrefutable patriarch of the Jewish people, because he will father Yaakov. But this child is irrelevant. David knew it was his child. People out there question it, it's irrelevant. That was my question. So what I said was, which I said, this insight was Siyata Dishmaya. The Gemara tells us in Brachos, on the Dalar and Aleph, that David had a Rebbe, his name was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the son of Shaul. He was the only surviving son of Shaul. Saul and his children were killed in battle with the Philistines. Yonasan, who was the closest friend of David, they were more than brothers, was killed in that battle. Mephibosheth was not. Who was Mephibosheth? He was the Rebbe of David. And David, even as king, David as a Torah sage, was one of the greatest Torah sages in the Jewish people. Whenever he would give a halachic decision, he would pass it before Mephibosheth to see maybe there was some inaccuracy. And there were times that Mephibosheth would criticize the cogency, question the cogency of David's position. You understand? David is king. David is a major Talmid Chacham. Nevertheless, for the sake of the truth of Torah, he would put him in a position that he would be embarrassed. There were times they would say, David, you made a mistake. And David, to be a certain degree, he's the king, and he's this great Torah sage. But for the sake of truth, David allowed himself to experience this embarrassment. To some degree, it does make a difference. But for the sake of Torah, he did it. So what did Hashem do? He had a son. He gave him a son, and this was the son of Abigail, this child that we're talking about. His name, it said, Gemara says, what was his name? His name was Kilov. Kilov. His real name was Daniel. But why was he called Kilov? Because he was Kulo of. He was all the father. Nobody could question whether he was the son of David. He looked exactly like David. He was Kulo of. He was totally his father. And this son, Kilov, surpassed David's Rebbe in Torah in Torah knowledge, where he paled to this child. And why did he merit to have a son who surpassed David's Rebbe? Because David, for the sake of the truth of Torah, actually was willing to put himself in a position that he'd be shamed, he'd be embarrassed. So Hashem rewarded him by giving a son, Kilov, who surpassed Mephibosheth. And the word says his real name was Ishbosheth, but he was called Mephibosheth because from the mouth of this Rebbe, David experienced Bosheth means shame. Okay? So that was the Mida Keneged Mida. Because you were willing to compromise your honor for the sake of truth of Torah, Hashem gave you a son, Kilov, which is Kulov, which his real name was Daniel, who surpassed the Torah knowledge of his Rebbe. Okay? David says in Tehillim, Chazal tell us who are the three most humble people who ever walked the face of the earth. Moshe was the most humble. How do we know he's the most humble? Because Torah says, he says, Nachnu Mo. What are we? We're nothing. The second most humble person was Avram Avinu. What did he say during the dialogue when he found out that Hashem was going to destroy Sodom? Ani off of Aether. I'm dust. I'm ash. I'm nothing. Dust and ash is more than nothing. The third most humble person is David HaMelech. Why? He says, Toleah, Ani Toleah V'loish. I'm a worm, I'm not a person. Could you imagine? David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim, the conqueror of Israel, the greatest king, the author of Tehillim. He says, I'm a worm, I'm not a man. You know, you could say a lot of things what you are. What's proof in the pudding? That's who he was. You know what proof of the pudding was? Hashem gave him a son by the name of Kilov, who surpassed the Torah knowledge, scholarship of his Rebbe. And why did God give him this? Because he was willing to suffer embarrassment for the sake of truth of Torah. You know what level of humility needed this? He's the king of Israel. But the question is, if they're going to question that this child may be the child of Novo, which there were murmurings, how do we prove that David was the third most humble person of the Jewish people? You know what the answer is? Hashem sent an angel to develop the face of this child to look exactly like his father. So this child was called Kilov Kulov. He's totally his father. As a result of that, it was established that this is the child of David, but why did he marry such a child? To outpace his Rebbe. The answer is because you had needed that special level of humility, otherwise it would have been impossible. Therefore, Hashem performed the miracle that his son should look exactly like his father, had nothing with the Davidic line, but rather to establish David as the third most humble person of Klal Yisrael.